Hello everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this presentation. Today I am excited to share with you the findings of my capstone research project, Nuestra Historia Vive, which explores how authentic cultural storytelling can strengthen trust, emotional connection, and engagement with younger Latino audiences in digital communication. You see, every Latino family has a story. Maybe it's your grandmother making tamales during Christmas. Maybe it's hearing Selena or Vicente Fernandez playing while everybody gathers in the kitchen. Maybe it's Sunday afternoon with your cousins laughing over a backyard carne asada. Or maybe it's simply hearing your parents switching effortlessly between English and Spanish while sharing stories that have been passed down through generations. Those moments become memories. Those memories become identity. That led me to ask one simple question. What happens when organizations tell stories that feel more like home? Those questions become the foundation of my capstone project, Nuestra Historia Vive, Our Story Lives. Today, I'll share with you how authentic cultural storytelling can become one of the most powerful strategic communication tools organizations can use to build lasting relationships with Latino communities. Before beginning this research, I wanted to better understand an important communication challenge facing organizations today. Latino audiences represent one of the fastest growing and most influential demographic groups across digital platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. As this audience continues to grow, organizations are investing more resources in multicultural marketing and digital communication. However, many campaigns still rely on stereotypes or surface-level cultural references rather than reflecting authentic lived experiences. Younger Latino audiences are becoming more selective and can quickly recognize when communication feels performative instead of genuine. While representation is important, audiences are looking for something deeper. They want to see stories that reflect their families, traditions, language, music, and everyday experiences. When communication lacks authenticity, organizations risk losing credibility, emotional engagement, trust, and the opportunity to build lasting relationships with the communities they hope to serve. That communication gap became the foundation of my research. I wanted to identify the storytelling elements that younger Latino audiences perceive as authentic and examine how those elements influence emotional engagement, trust, participation, and cultural identity. Rather than assuming what resonates with Latino audiences, I wanted the data to reveal which types of storytelling creates the strongest and most meaningful connections. Ultimately, this study provides evidence-based recommendations that organizations can use to move beyond symbolic representation and create communication that is culturally authentic, emotionally engaging, and relationship-centered. The findings demonstrate that when organizations tell stories that genuinely reflect Latino culture and lived experiences, they have a greater opportunity to strengthen trust, increase engagement, and build long-term relationships with the audience they serve. Before designing this study, I conducted an extensive review of the literature to understand what researchers had already discovered about nostalgia, cultural identity, digital storytelling, authenticity, and audience engagement. Previous studies consistently found that nostalgia creates a powerful emotional connection by reminding people of meaningful memories, traditions, and shared experiences. Researchers also found that authentic storytelling strengthens organizational trust and credibility because audiences are more likely to engage with communication that reflects their real lives rather than stereotypes or superficial cultural references. The literature also emphasized the importance of cultural identity in strategic communication. Studies showed that Latino audiences connect most strongly with stories that reflect family traditions, language, music, food, and everyday cultural experiences. In addition, researchers found that digital storytelling is more effective than traditional promotional messaging because it encourages participation, conversation, and emotional engagement. Together, these studies established that authenticity and storytelling are essential components of successful communication campaigns. However, despite these important findings, I identified a significant gap in the literature. Most previous research examined nostalgia, authenticity, cultural identity, and digital storytelling as separate concepts. Very little research explored how these factors work together to influence younger Latino audiences in digital communication campaigns. To address that gap, I developed 4 research questions that focus on emotional engagement, authenticity, trust, and participation, and the role of cultural identity. Rather than viewing these as separate questions, they work together to answer one larger question. How can organizations use culturally authentic storytelling to build stronger, more meaningful relationships with younger Latino audiences? These research questions became the foundation of my study, guided the design for my survey, and ultimately shaped the findings I will present in the next section on mythology. To answer my research questions, I selected a mixed method research design because I wanted to capture both the measurable patterns in the data and the personal experiences behind those patterns. While qualitative data allow me to identify statistical relationships, qualitative responses provided a deeper insight into how participants personally experience culturally authentic storytelling. Combining these two approaches created a more comprehensive understanding of the research problem than either method could provide on its own. Data was collected through an anonymous online survey created in Google Forms and distributed through my social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Linktree. A total of 123 participants completed the survey. The quantitative responses were analyzed using descriptive statistics and chi-square tests of independence to examine relationships among emotional engagement, authenticity, trust, participation, and cultural identity. To complement the statistical analysis, participants also responded to open-ended questions describing what authentic cultural storytelling meant to them. Those responses were analyzed using thematic analysis to identify recurring themes and shared experiences. This mixed method approach allowed me to go beyond simply reporting percentages and statistical significance. It helped me explain why participants responded the way they did and connected the numerical findings to real stories, memories, and cultural experiences. By integrating quantitative evidence with qualitative insight, the study provides a more complete understanding on how nostalgia-based storytelling influences younger Latino audiences and offers practical recommendations for organizations seeking to build stronger, more authentic relationships with their communities. The results of this study provided clear answers to each of my research questions and revealed several important patterns. First, participants consistently reported stronger emotional connections to culturally centered digital storytelling. Although the statistical relationships for emotional engagement was not significant, the descriptive findings demonstrated that nostalgia-based storytelling created meaningful emotional connections by reminding participants of their families, traditions, language, and shared cultural experiences. This suggests that emotional engagement extends beyond statistical significance and reflects the personal impact that authentic storytelling can have on audiences. The strongest findings emerge when examining authenticity, trust, and participation. Authenticity demonstrated a statistical significant relationship, with 93.5% of participants agreeing that nostalgia-based storytelling makes digital communication feel more authentic and relatable. In addition, 89.3% of participants indicated that they would be more likely to engage with, share, or support organizations that communicate through culturally authentic storytelling. These findings suggest that authenticity is not simply appreciated by audiences, it directly influences their willingness to build relationships with organizations. Finally, cultural identity produced the strongest statistical relationship in the entire study. Participants who felt emotionally connected to culturally authentic content were significantly more likely to trust organizations and engage with their communication. Taken together, these findings demonstrate that authentic storytelling rooted in culture, family, traditions, and lived experiences strengthens emotional engagement, builds trust, and encourages meaningful audience participation. Rather than relying on stereotypes or symbolic representations, organizations can create stronger and long lasting relationships by telling stories that genuinely reflect the communities they hope to serve. While the statistical findings were essential in identifying patterns and relationships, the qualitative responses truly brought this research to life. The numbers showed that authenticity influences trust, emotional engagement, and participation, but the participant stories helped explain why those relationships exist. Their responses added meaning and context to the statistical findings, transforming the data into real human experiences. Participants consistently described authentic storytelling as communication that reminded them of family gatherings, their grandparents, music, language, food, holidays, and childhood memories. These were not simply nostalgic moments. They represented experiences that shaped their cultural identity and created a sense of belonging. Many participants explained that when organizations accurately reflect these lived experiences, they felt seen, respected, and genuinely understood rather than simply being marketed to. One of the strongest themes that emerged was the connection between authenticity and trust. Participants repeatedly emphasized that organizations earned credibility when they move beyond stereotypes and represent Latino culture through genuine stories, traditions, and everyday experiences. Together, the quantitative and qualitative findings tell one consistent story. Authentic storytelling is more than effective communication strategy. It creates meaningful emotional connections, strengthens trust, and helps organizations build lasting relationships with the communities they hope to serve. The findings from this study extend beyond academic research by providing practical, evidence-based recommendations that organizations can immediately apply to strengthen communication with Latino audiences. Rather than viewing these recommendations as separate ideas, I see them as a roadmap for building stronger and more meaningful relationships. As shown in this visual, the journey begins with authentic storytelling. When organizations share stories that genuinely reflect Latino culture, traditions, language, music, and everyday experiences, they create communication that audiences recognize as real rather than performative. The second step is integrating cultural authenticity throughout the entire communication process. Authenticity cannot be added at the end of a campaign. It must be incorporated from the very beginning. This means involving Latino voices in campaign planning, collaborating with community members and cultural advisors, and ensuring that messaging reflects lived experiences instead of stereotypes. When organizations invest in understanding the communities they serve, they establish credibility and begin building trust. Finally, organizations should create opportunities for community engagement by inviting audiences to become active participants in conversation. Encouraging people to share their own stories, traditions, celebrations, photographs, and personal experiences transforms communication from one-way advertising into meaningful dialogue. As this roadmap illustrates, authentic stories build community. Community creates trust. Trust encourages engagement. And over time, that engagement develops into loyalty and long-term relationships. Ultimately, these recommendations demonstrate that authentic storytelling is not simply a communication strategy. It is a relationship building strategy that helps organizations create lasting connections with the communities they hope to serve. This study contributes to both academic research and professional practice by demonstrating that authentic cultural storytelling is not simply an effective communication strategy. It is an essential expectation among younger Latino audiences. Throughout this research, participants consistently valued communication that reflected their real lives rather than generalized cultural symbols or stereotypes. They responded most positively to stories centered on family traditions, language, music, food, and shared experiences because those stories reflected their cultural identity and created genuine emotional connections. From a managerial perspective, these findings suggest that organizations should rethink how they develop and evaluate communication campaigns. Authenticity cannot be treated as an afterthought or added at the end of a creative process. Instead, organizations should invest in understanding the communities they serve, collaborate with Latino voices throughout campaign development, and create opportunities for meaningful dialogue rather than a one-way promotion. As this visual illustrates, authentic storytelling strengthens community. Community builds trust. Trust encourages engagement, and over time, that engagement develops into a long-term loyalty. Perhaps the most important implication of this study is that organizations should redefine what successful communication looks like. Success should not be measured solely by impressions, views, or clicks. Instead, organizations should evaluate whether their communication builds trust, encourages meaningful engagement, and strengthens long-term relationship with the communities they hope to serve. Ultimately, this research demonstrates that when organizations communicate with authenticity, respect, and cultural understanding, they do far more than promote a message. They build relationships that create lasting impact. As I conclude, I'd like to return where this presentation began. Every Latino has a story. Those stories are passed from one generation to the next through family traditions, music, language, food, celebrations, and the memories we create together. They preserve our culture, strengthen our identity, and remind us where we come from. Throughout this research, I discovered that these same experiences also influence the way younger Latino audiences connect with organizations and the messages they receive. When communication reflects authentic cultural experiences instead of stereotype, people feel seen, respected, understood, and represented. The findings of this study demonstrate that authentic storytelling is far more than an effective marketing technique. It is a powerful strategic communication tool that builds trust, encourages meaningful engagement, and creates lasting relationships. Organizations that take the time to understand the communities they serve and tell stories that genuinely reflect those lived experiences will create stronger and more meaningful connections with their audiences. That is the heart of Nuestra Historia Vive. People don't connect with perfect marketing. They connect with stories that they feel like home. Nuestra Historia Vive. Our story lives.